Hello, and thanks for tuning in to End the News here at globaltalkradio.com. I want to introduce to you today's guest. He is Daniel Ottalini, a self-published author who writes alternate history and steampunk novels. Now, his first book, Brass Legionnaire, is already a finalist for the Electronic Publishing Industry Coalition's eBook Awards, and his second novel, Copper Centurion, will be out here in the spring of 2013. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you become a writer?
Actually, in college, I was sort of a writer. I really wanted to use my friends as my characters, so I started writing, and I got about 7 or 8 chapters into a story, but I then sort of lost interest. And what I discovered is that for me, one of the hardest things about writing is being self-disciplined enough to actually finish my novel. And so Brass Legionnaire is actually the first novel that I had to write down in pen, and then I was actually able to finish it. Which is sort of funny for me because I normally used to hate actually writing and not typing.
Well, here's a question. Do your novels end up being the way that you thought they were when you started writing them, or do they change over time?
I find they change over time. After I handwrite them, I go in and I type them, and you always discover that when you've been writing in the moment, the ideas don't always flow the way they're supposed to. And so between myself and my editor and my beta readers, the story definitely takes turns that I wouldn't expect, but they're always fun and exciting, so that's always good.
Now, you chose to go the self-publishing route?
Yes.
Why is that?
Part of me is very impatient, and I really like to be in control. And also, I had been doing a lot of research on self-publishing, and it seemed to me that it was more doable than getting an agent and waiting around for someone to pick up my book. And Brass Legionnaire is can be very focused and niche because it is a steampunk and alternate history book, and it's not going to appeal to everyone, perhaps, although I personally think it's a great story. But I really like being able to pick my team, my editor, my cover artist, my formatters, the people doing my illustrations, and I really liked being able to build a team that I knew and could work with rather than just someone assigned to me.
Now, you've picked a rather unique genre, Roman steampunk. Why is that?
Yes. Well, that's exactly the point. It is really unique. There are very few books out there that actually match that, and I'm a huge fan of Roman history. When I was in college, I studied abroad in Rome and Naples, and I really just love that sort of time period. And it's always funny that few authors really consider what would have happened if the Roman Empire had survived. And I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the eastern part of it, the Byzantines, survived until the 1400s. That's only 600 years ago. That's really not that long ago. And I've always enjoyed steampunk novels, and so I sort of wanted to put the two together, but I really tried to make it more realistic. Like, they're not running around with guns and machine guns, but instead they're running around with machines that the Romans could have actually created. And it's not Victorian steampunk, so there's no tea parties, and there's no people running around with canes or attacking zombies or ray guns. It's a lot more, I know, exactly. It's a lot more focused on taking the old Roman technology and then updating it with, instead of having, just regular bows and arrows, they have crossbows, but they're repeater crossbows, and maybe they have gunpowder so the bolts can be explosive. So you take what the Romans definitely had, and then you build on it to make it a logical, technological progression.
What I was reading was Brass Legionnaire and Copper Centurion are actually part of a series that you're working on. Could you tell us about that?
Yes. Sure. It's called the Steam Empire Chronicles, and it charts the progress of basically the second in line to the throne. He's not the first in line to the throne, but sort of the spare heir, I like to call him, whose name is Constantine Appius, and he's a prince of the empire, and Julius Caesar, but he's not Julius Caesar, he's Julius Brutus Caesar. He's actually named after the original emperor, and these two men are the main characters. And in the first book, they introduce the world, and we sort of learn sort of the events and what's going on, and the story's going to progress. And in Copper Centurion, they actually sort of head north into Nordland, which is basically Scandinavia, and they are trying to enact some retribution for some of the actions that happened in the first book. But not all goes as planned. And there are going to be 5 books in the series, and so this is number 2.
Now, maybe you probably run across, had a few experiences that might help new authors, maybe some of your biggest learning experiences or greatest achievements so far. Any advice that you would give fellow new authors?
Oh, absolutely. Plan, save up, and write a lot. Like I told you, the very first novel I wrote never got finished because I didn't plan it out. Mm-hmm. So definitely plan it out, do your outlines, fill out each chapter, think about your characters and where you want the story to go. I actually have the stories planned out to the 5th book, at least very roughly, because so that way each story then flows into where I want it to go. And saving up, obviously, if you're going to self-publish, you have to pay for everything pretty much on your own. So make sure you save up your money. Yeah. And then the writing a lot, don't just buttonhole yourself with one book. I think that was probably my biggest mistake, was only having one book ready to go and not trying to come out with at least something like a short story or another thing, because if you only have one thing, then people can only find you one way. If you have more than one thing, people can find one thing and maybe buy that, and then see your other stuff and buy that also.
Exactly. Daniel, how do you keep in touch with fans?
I have a Twitter at @Ottalini. I have a blog, which is just my full name.com, and I have a Facebook page. And if you're interested more in the series and not necessarily me, which I would totally understand, there's a website for my novels, brasslegionnaire.com, and I always like to put up fan art or sneak peeks at the illustrations on the inside of the novel on that book webpage.
Very good. Well, we'll put a link up for listeners to find you easily. And we've been speaking again with Daniel Ottalini, his first book, Brass Legionnaire, his follow-up, Copper Centurion, and hopefully we'll be hearing much more from him in the future. Daniel, thank you very much for being part of our program.
Thank you so much for having me.